What is audience relevance? Audience relevance is a hermeneutical tool that you need to use when you read the Bible, because the Bible is a very ancient text that goes back 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 years ago in the reference that the authors are referring to. And so when you understand that, you're using audience relevance, saying that we need to go into the text and know what the original audience is and what the original authors are. Who are they? And that this was written for a specific historical time frame in a specific crisis point, and it's referring to this other audience, this ancient audience, not me, not you. And so we have to do a lot of excavation historically, culturally, linguistically. We have to go in there. And of course, the Bible in the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, not in English, not in Spanish, not in Korean. It was written in Hebrew. You have to go to that original language and begin to work out the actual meaning of these words. And we have tons of translations. But this is a translation, and we know how flawed translations can be, right? I've worked in many cross-cultural situations, and it's really interesting how certain things that you want to say, it doesn't come across correctly. And because there's a lot of nuance there, and there's a lot of difficulty in the vocabulary and concepts that don't relate very well to another culture. And so this is very important for the Old Testament. And then you have the New Testament, which is Greek. But the concepts within the Bible are all Hebraic. It's not Greek, but they're using the Hellenized version of the Koine Greek to explain these things. And so there's a lot of mistranslation even with that. So that's very difficult. So audience relevance is going into the Bible and saying, oh my gosh, the audience relevance is showing us that the authors of the Bible and the audience of the Bible, that they were only for the covenantal members of the 12 tribes of Israel. And then outside of that, that God didn't have any covenant outside of this national, suzerain vassal treaty agreement. It's basically their birth certificate, right? And their national, you could say constitution that we're reading. And so when you look at a national constitution, it's always connected to geography, that land. It's always connected to the language of the people and the people themselves and that territory. So if you don't have any of that, then there is no need for a covenantal system, because the covenant was always attached to that land. And we know that all of that has already been fulfilled by 70 AD. So when you're actually reading the Bible and studying the Bible, it's going back in time, and you're really a history major. You're going into the history. I mean, I am really shocked that so many people that, have been Christians for a very long time, they don't even know the biblical history of how biblical Israel ceased in 721 BCE during the Assyrian captivity. Once the 10 tribes were taken out and they never returned back, okay? Once that happened, they ceased to be the covenant people. I don't know if you realize that. So biblical Israel ended in 721 BCE. Now, the house of Judah, the 2 tribes, they almost ended in 586 BCE when Babylon came and took them out, into captivity. But like through the prophecy of Jeremiah and like Daniel, that they were going to return back into the land after 70 years. It wasn't really 70 years, but that's the language that they use, because 70 is like a number of completion for a nation. And so they did return. And when they did return, here you have the whole setup for that whole grace period of like 490 years before Jesus comes on the scene to be that new Messiah, the new head of Moses. And so there you have this house of Judea, or now in the Bible where we have reference to the Jews, because they were from the house of Judea, right? And so in this context, we're recognizing that, hey, none of this even pertains to us. It wasn't written to us, but it was written for us. So then we got to look in there and say, okay, so then what is applicable for me today in my personal walk with God? What is applicable for me today in certain decisions that I have to make? What is applicable for me today in certain principles or standards that I live by, right? And that's where you then have to go and take a look to see if it is even applicable. And most of the time, it's not necessary, right? Because God has written his love in your heart, right? And it's not stone anymore. It's of flesh. And now you have this open relationship, and it's all based on relationship, dealing with you and him and with your conscience and with your intellect and with your emotions and feelings and what you know. And you're walking with God and you're doing this relationship with him. And some people are, a lot closer and know more about him, and other people, they're way further behind you, right? And so there's a whole spectrum of people that are walking with God. But this is how we walk with God now that we understand that the covenantal system never applied to us. And so we're not living under a new covenant or an old covenant system. You don't want to be under a covenant system. It's very strict, and it's there's a lot of ramifications for that. So we're no longer under that. So then what are we under? We are under a whole new way of doing life with God in a relationship model, not a religious model. And so audience relevance brings us all the way back to, hey, are we asking the right questions? We cannot put our modern standards and principles into an ancient text like the Bible and demand it to answer the questions that we have for us today. That's completely eisegesis. That's not what you're supposed to do. Okay. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap of wanting to do that because we have always heard, hey, the Bible is, it's universal. It applies to everyone. Yes, but in a very specific context. We have to explain that through. And so people are coming to the Bible seeking for all of these answers when that is exactly what you're not supposed to do. You have to go into the text and actually look at the crisis point, the historical point. What is this story talking about? What were they feeling, thinking? What was God trying to do to communicate with them? And a lot of times in the Bible, you have their perspective of God, which sometimes is right and other times it's not right. And it's in there. And I like it that it's in there because you see the humanness, the naturalness of people at a certain time struggling with, gosh, what is the nature of God? What is his character? Can I trust him? Is he here for me to help me? I mean, they're going through all the same kinds of questions that we've had, but in their context. And we have to study it in that context. That's why the Bible is very important, because it's a historical record. It is history. It's not just allegory and myth and all of this. No, there is some myth and allegory used in there, but these were real people, real covenantal kingdom people, and God interacted with them to what? Show the rest of the world, hey, these are some things that you need to know about God and how to come into relationship with him. That's why the Bible is there. So we need audience relevance as a tool to go into the text and to actually interpret it and then apply it if it's applicable. That is audience relevance.